Mr. President, uh, distinguished members of the world Jewish communities around the world, dear ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, let me express my heartfelt thanks for inviting me to address this distinguished audience. My cousin, I'm proud to say this because his family is a very well-known Jewish family throughout decades. Mr. Karp does wonders and brings me along, and I can never refuse his call. I would say call to peace, because I would not say call to arms. I'm afraid I owe this distinction to the generosity and kindness of this well-known friend and cousin, the President of the Jewish community of Lisbon. And in any case, as a former mayor of this city, and as a former President of Portugal, I would like to welcome you to Lisbon and convey to you all my best wishes. I hope your forum went well and that you held fruitful exchanges. Lisbon and Portugal in general is, I think I can say it, is an inspiring place that makes the most of its diversity, where people feel welcome and cross-cultural interaction is forging a new sense of local citizenship. It's not easy, but it has been done. Your Excellencies, dear friends, if you allow me, we are facing challenging, disturbing times. Once again, we are in shock as multiple shootings and bombings hit Paris, targeting innocent civilians when they were just living their lives peacefully. These are horrifying attacks that affect the whole world. No country, no society, no group are immune from the risk of terror and barbaric violence. This is why all societies and peoples need to stand up and fight together against extremism and radicalization in order to prevent this kind of terror from happening. We all know that we are faced with a complex challenge that is multidimensional and that requires as well as a combination of various approaches and strategies. However, as a former mayor, I truly believe that there is a lot to be done at the level of the town and the city, and that a better local governance policy is indispensable to deal with challenges related to growing intolerance, extremism, and radicalization. In other terms, my point here today is that the local matters and might even have an active role to play in building, I know it's difficult, but in building inclusive, pluralistic, tolerant, diverse, peaceful societies. Indeed, we live at a time when globalization, national and increasingly international forces play a powerful part in our lives. Never before, perhaps, has there been such an intervening of issues in geopolitics, foreign, state security, and social policy together at the level of the street. A thing that has emerged is that the local leadership and allegiance has dwindled. It has been replaced by other supralocal forces, whether religious, political, or cultural. However, I do believe that we need to forge and implement a new form of local polity that speaks to the new conditions on the ground. For that, we need a new local leadership, governance, and citizenship able to deal with a whole range of challenges, while national governments and the international community set the tone on other issues such as border controls or fight against international terrorism. My second main point, ladies and gentlemen, here today is against portraying the current crisis as a symptom of a clash of civilizations between the Muslim world and the West. Stigmatizing a whole community for the outrages of a few is unfair. I think it is wrong. And more than everything, I think it is extremely dangerous. On top of that, the current situation in the Middle East makes it crystal clear that Muslims hardly form a monolithic bloc. On the contrary, what we are witnessing is that fierce sectarian violence rages among them and shows no sign of abating. Your Excellencies, I must confess I was planning to address today the topical issue of the need to reshape the humanitarian agenda and prioritize higher education within it. My cousin, Mr. Karp, showed the way which I can obviously follow. However, of course, due to the current circumstances, I decided to change my initial plans. Before drawing to a close, allow me just to share a few thoughts with you on this very important issue on the humanitarian agenda. As you know, there are an increasing number of humanitarian crises going on. Syria, indeed, but also Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, Libya, Sahel countries, South Sudan, etc. 37 countries worldwide seem to be in this situation. So this means that the number of refugees and forcibly displaced people affected by conflicts is really increasing. Now it is estimated that there can be in need of humanitarian aid. To give you an idea of the dimension of the problem, in 2015, this year, a total number of 78.9 million refugees and forcibly displaced people exist. Now, when you think that the average duration of civil wars is 8 to 10 years, and of displacement is now 17 to 20 years in major refugee situations, you realize what are at stake and that what we are speaking of are long-term needs. Having said this, let me ask you 3 questions. First, how on earth can we ignore this absolutely unique role of higher education in producing the leaders and skilled workforce that countries need to move forward, in particular after crisis and after conflict? The second, how on earth can we ignore the conflicts and wars cut off many young people from their studies and the promise of their future, thus rendering entire generations uneducated, developmentally disadvantaged, and unprepared to contribute to their societal recovery? I mean, how can we ignore the so-called lost generation of university graduates? And the third one is, how on earth can we disregard the challenges faced by the current humanitarian system? On the one hand, it cannot both rapidly respond to new crises and continue to service situations of chronic need, but on the other hand, it cannot cope either with all the immediate needs, such as shelter, nourishment, and health, and at the same time meeting needs that require a more developmental perspective, such as the needs of education system affected by the conflict. So, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, my main point is twofold. We need to reshape the current humanitarian system in order to address properly all needs, to free up capacities and to get faster, better, and more focused responses involving both the so-called humanitarian assistance and development actors. Higher education in emergency should be a key new pillar of this new humanitarian agenda for the 21st century. Indeed, in complex emergency situations, there are pressing needs that require, of course, immediate responses, such as providing refugees with shelter, food, and health. But education at large, and higher education in particular, cannot be seen as a luxury. On the contrary, my take is that higher education opportunities have to be integrated since day one into a humanitarian response. Yes, definitely. But this integration should be implemented through a specific mechanism, which I have been sort of selling in international terms, and I have been calling it a rapid response mechanism for higher education in emergencies. And like primary and secondary education, the so-called tertiary level, or higher education, is a largely independent, autonomous system in most of our countries. International mobility, cooperation, exchanges are integral to the academic system. Universities and higher education schools are used to host foreign students and scholars. They have developed common procedures to recognize previous studies and degrees, and so they are able to develop emergency academic responses if they are asked. So my point is that the global academic community should be mobilized to be part of this rapid response mechanism for higher education in emergencies. Universities and higher education schools of all around the world, and I think you could play a leading role in this, should form an academic consortium at the core of this mechanism. Therefore, this mechanism for higher education in emergency should be a kind of a specialized fast-track entry point of the humanitarian agenda. The central objective of this response mechanism is therefore twofold. Provide, to begin with, rapid access to higher education, and therefore to ensure that refugees are able to pursue their studies and that they are offered an academic opportunity of graduating over wartime or during the conflict. And of course, create safe havens for scholars, academics and researchers affected by emergencies and ensure that they can cooperate with the global education community and, where possible, to protect valuable resources from collateral damage. No other important point is related to the question on how to make financial resources available to them. My answer here again is optimistic. We should set up a global fund for higher education in emergencies as a key component of this rapid response mechanism. If each time there is an emergency, one has to start everything from scratch, identifying host universities for refugees, making fundraising, etc. Time will be lost and immediate action becomes impossible. Just look at the Syrian case. The war drags into its 5th year. If such a mechanism as I am proposing was already operational, we would already have a whole generation of Syrians graduating during the war. This global fund should be made up of an initial core funding made by a small group of champions, countries, foundations, philanthropists, and the private sector. And let me use this opportunity to urge the participants in this session just to think about it. And it should be made sustainable through a voluntary contribution on an annual basis of $1, €1, £1 by all university students, professors, and researchers around the world as a kind of solidarity levy to the global academic community. This is my vision. Of course, it arises from the fact that I have created this experience in Portugal and in other countries too, with the support from many universities inside and outside Portugal. And I have verified that you need to build up on the future of a generation, on the future. Peace will come, whether it's in 5 or 10 years or whatever. But you need an elite capable of leading the recovery of a country. Like the Marshall Plan did its wonderful job in Europe in the 40s, like other situations have been met by specific targeted help to form what can be the forces of these new states to be completed. And the third thing is to work with peaceful tools. Because war is war. It's dreadful, but it occurs. Everything occurs which is dreadful is going on at this moment. Look at just Friday in Paris. But we have to have a touch of hope. We have to have the possibility of seeing that there is a part of all of us, a part of those who can play a role in leadership in the future in their own countries, to rise from what is catastrophic, and we could not imagine that we would be witnessing what we are witnessing. But this can only be fought by security schemes, of course, by, in my view, democratic schemes at the same time, and this quality of education and information, putting people inside instead of throwing them outside. It's a very, very difficult job. And it's even more difficult to say this to you at this moment, when all of us are absolutely flabbergasted by what happened in Paris, but not only in Paris, has been happening everywhere, has been happening in Syria for the last 5 years. Not much attention of the international community as such, with different interests altogether. So, ladies and gentlemen, I wish you well in your communities. You have a very important role to play. I'm sure of that. I'm proud of my cousins, so to say. And I have learned a lot with them all the time. They have been in this country, apart from the 500 years which my cousin transformed in a 5-minute speech. It's a long story. Not always easy, of course, with very good moments and very bad moments too. But nevertheless, we are here in a good moment. We are very proud of what we can manage when you see before I arrived, the municipality of the same political party as our friend, Member of Parliament, João Rebelo, who had in fact given land to build all sorts of temples for the various religious communities in this country. We have one of the oldest synagogues. We have a mosque. We have Catholic churches everywhere. And this is a sign that we cannot let to be destroyed, because this has made us a very opening country. And I'm really saying this because what happened in Paris, now that we are expecting this wave of the first refugees, it's again a challenging time, which obviously will necessarily meet a great attention of all Portuguese. We have to be, as in the past, with those who came forward and through, and my father was a doctor to many Jews going through Portugal after the Second World War. We have to respond again to this challenge, and I am sure that in all your countries we have very many specific challenges, your own challenges, your own confrontations with the local and national realities, difficult ones sometimes. And there's only one word which I don't like to use because it has many significances, but I use it here. We need peace, we need tolerance, we need understanding. So all the best for your endeavors. Thank you very much, Mr. President.